Stephen Handwerk, thank you so much for joining me on Louisiana Lefty.
Lynda Woolard, it is a pleasure to be back again, reunited, and it feels so good.
Well, I am reminded that you are the very first Facebook video I did for Louisiana Lefty. Before I even had a podcast out, you and I got on and did a Facebook Live.
That's right. We did. I remember that.
Coached me on how to do that. So that's been a little over a year ago. In fact, it was right around the time of the January 6th insurrection.
You're kidding me. Oh my goodness.
Which is what we're going to talk about on the video today. So we've got a podcast we're recording later, but before we get to that, we're going to do this Facebook video, which I actually will eventually also put on YouTube. So we'll eventually have YouTube videos as well. Stephen, the first hearing of the January 6th committee was last night. I just want to tell you my first two big takeaways, the bombshells that I got, and a lot of it because I have paid, like you, I'm sure, rapt attention to so much of this over the last year and a half. But two bombshells that I did not know going into the night were that there is testimonial evidence that Donald J. Trump and his advisors knew that he lost the election. And there is testimonial evidence that the attack on the Capitol and the attempted coup were part of Donald J. Trump's plan to illegally remain in power.
That is correct.
Those were my two big ones. What was your big first impression of that?
Yeah, so both of those things were earth-shattering to me because I believe that for the last few months, we've been hearing from a lot of the prosecutors, former prosecutors, people who work in that space that talk about the level of criminality, that it wouldn't be as bad if someone really thought that they in fact did win the election. But if they knew for a fact that they lost the election and that they were just trying to subvert that election, that then carries this whole other slew of criminality to it. And last night, it was unequivocal. I mean, not only that, but to hear the president's daughter in her own words say that she believed Bill Barr and his assessment that there was no widespread fraud. There certainly wasn't fraud to the level that it would have changed any of the results in any of the battleground states. And to hear that, I want to say the other thing that really did come into heavy focus for me was the volume of video that we hadn't seen yet. And for some reason, it only just last night clicked to me because I think while we were in the space, right? While we were in the space of the day, as it was happening, as it was unrolling, I forgot how long of a time span this was. Hearing that Capitol Police officer testify that they were under hand-to-hand combat for hours, and there was no help coming.
Begging for help. Begging for help.
No help coming. Those were probably the two biggest things in my brain that was really hard. And then seeing her testify, Officer Edwards, seeing her testify, and then seeing the video of her going down. Oof, that hit me hard.
Juxtaposition of that. Yeah. And to your point about no help coming, Stephen, they also had testimonial evidence that Donald Trump had not called for backup from the Attorney General, from Homeland Security, from the military, from the National Guard. There is a debunked claim that National Guard piece had something to do with Nancy Pelosi. That's making the rounds again. That never happened. Donald Trump never contacted Nancy Pelosi in advance of the day. She would not have been the person to contact in advance of the day about the National Guard, regardless of people repeatedly correcting this
Right.
untruth that keeps being put out there. That is a learned last night is that Donald Trump never ever called for any of those things. And on the contrary, it is said through testimonial evidence. Again, I believe it was Mike Pence's chief of staff, but it was definitely Mark Milley.
Right.
Saying that Mike Pence had at one point in time effectively become the commander in chief.
Right.
That Trump had so abdicated his role as commander in chief that Mike Pence had taken it over and was calling for those things to be done.
Exactly. And that he was delivering those orders,
right,
was really, again, when you look, and I'm such a scholar of like all of the palace intrigue, like how these things happen, like through all of the years, right, through all of the different presidencies, to see the different things that would happen, and even going down the rabbit hole of Aaron Sorkin's version of the world through The West Wing, seeing how those things have to happen in order to keep the government running, and realizing that because, and I like that word, I think that it's a completely accurate word, the abdication of the presidency by Donald Trump, because he was acting like a child and was only watching TV and only talking to the people who he wanted to hear from, who were reinforcing his crazy, that Mike Pence did have to step in. And at the end of the day, Mike Pence had to step in while he had a lynch mob out there waiting for him,
calling for him,
a gallows built.
Whether or not it was a functional gallows is besides the point.
Completely beside, yeah.
And again, we don't really know what the outcome of his calls for those military or National Guard backup was. I believe they're going to show that in future hearings. But yeah, so that another, and we texted a little bit about this last night when it was happening. Another thing that was profound for me, I thought Liz Cheney, much as we got to say it,
right,
surprise to anyone, I don't agree with her politically on anything, but I thought she did a remarkable job prosecuting the case and giving the opening arguments essentially for the case. When she showed the painting, the John Turnbull painting of Washington, George Washington resigning his post as commander in chief,
right,
after his 2 terms, saying no one should stay, that would be a king, I don't want to be a king, I don't want to stay in power.
Right.
Showing that painting while she was talking about how every president in our history has participated in the peaceful transfer of power except this one.
Exactly.
Was a profound moment for me.
Was.
And again, and I also want to make the caveat, I made the caveat about Liz Cheney. I will also make the caveat about George Washington. I know he was a flawed person as well. However, that particular moment and that particular stance he took of the peaceful transfer of power and not remaining in office as president for your whole life,
right,
is important to our democracy. So anyway, I just wanted to mention how profound and powerful I thought that moment was.
I think that's absolutely right. And then seeing those camera angles that we had not seen before, it reminds me of like all of those movies that we see where like the flood of water comes rushing into a building to flood the place. We see flooding all too frequently here in Louisiana, but seeing that kind of fisheye view of the crypt as the rioters, and I'm glad that we're no longer kind of romanticizing this and calling them protesters. This was not a protest. Seeing that deluge come in, it reminded me of kind of like tidal waters coming in and just sweeping through that. They were packed in there. They stormed in. They were incredibly violent. You see all of them, you see the ones with flags hanging on poles. in a normal way, you've been to the Capitol. I've been to the Capitol multiple times. I've gone into those secret areas. I've ridden on the train beneath the Capitol to go to the different sides. To me, to see those weapons inside our Capitol, to see a Confederate flag inside our Capitol that had never happened before, to see that in there was just, to see it again, it just brought me back to that day as we were on there. And I wasn't as brave as you. I didn't scroll back to my tweets of the day of when it was happening, because it really hits me incredibly hard.
Well, it was interesting for me to go back and look at my tweets because I could not remember what was going on in my mind that day. And looking at my tweets, I went from shock to outrage.
Yep.
And my final tweet said, I'm something to the effect of, I'm both terrified and infuriated, but I'm also mainly determined.
Yeah.
And that was what I took from that day, is that we cannot let that be the last word. We cannot let these people have the last word on our democracy. And the point was made last night, essentially, that this is an ongoing attack on the democracy.
Yeah.
That coup existed in that space of that day, but it started months in advance and it continues now.
And it does. And the best way, I believe, to illustrate that point is look at the number of legislators, especially on the right, that were calling for peace, that were calling out these rioters, that were calling out these acts on the day of. But now all of a sudden, okay, throughout the past year and a half, they have migrated on their thinking here. And now all of a sudden you see McCarthy and others who now are completely walked back any of those statements and are now saying that this is just being overblown, that it was just a vigorous day at the Capitol. I mean, come on.
I want one more thing that I thought was really, I had not known before, let me say, before that testimony. And I will say that last night portends a lot more bombshells to me, because if they started with that and we're not even into the big testimony yet, this was just like top notes. I feel like there's a lot to come. But the fact that someone approached, again, testimonial evidence, someone approached Trump telling him that rioters were chanting "Hang Mike Pence" at the Capitol. And his response was, maybe our supporters have the right idea. He deserves it.
Right.
And Liz Cheney made a point of saying, this is a quote.
Yeah.
This is a quote.
Right.
Maybe he deserves it.
And
I can't imagine being Mike Pence and ever handling with that man ever again. I mean, I can't even imagine how Lindsey Graham and Kevin McCarthy have returned to this fellow. They had the chance to move away from this guy.
Exactly. They all had the chance. They had the ripe opportunity to be able to divorce themselves from this whole thing, and they chose not to. And, I'll give the obligatory, I don't agree with Mike Pence on virtually anything politically, but you know what? He was a patriot that day. Yeah. He was a patriot that day. And he also was a patriot when he turned around and went to whatever one of those far right-wing Republican conferences are.
Federalist Society.
Exactly. And be able to say to them that Donald Trump was wrong. That took some intestinal fortitude. That took really a strong patriot to do that. And I will give him credit for that, because that's not just because I agree with him. It's because it was the right thing to do. Seeing that, hearing that as a quote, and having her dot those I's and cross those T's to say this was a quote, hearing from the attorneys that were in the room and that were making the arguments to them, telling the president that he had lost, hearing from the pollsters, telling them, and look, you and I've been there on election nights when we're looking at the numbers come in, and we can see before it's announced we can see what the outcome is going to be. And whether we get dressed up or we pour another drink is usually the question of those nights. And to see that they were informed, they knew the way this was going. They knew the only way that they could snatch victory out of defeat was for them to play these games, for them to create the story. And that's what we did. And that's what we've been combating, the big lie, this whole entire year and a half or more.
So I did go back and look also at the first 3 episodes. By that dual thing that happened on January 5th and January 6th, which was the Georgia Senate runoff elections.
Yep.
And the following day should have been the certification and became this January. It ended up being the certification, but it was supposed to just be that. It ended up also being this other thing that we're still living with.
Right.
So that was interesting to me that this whole podcast started in the shadow of those two things, right? Kirsten Alvinatakis, our former colleague at the Louisiana Democratic Party, was the 3rd episode. And she texted me this morning and said, that episode still holds up, where we discussed January 6th. And her contention there was this was the beer hall putsch, Hitler's Hitler's beer hall putsch.
Right.
This was the trial run.
Yeah.
This is the trial run. If they're not held accountable,
right,
they do it again.
Every time.
And much more likely to be successful. Correct. When they've learned what they did wrong the first time. Absolutely. And the changes they need to make to be successful the second time.
That's absolutely right. I mean, hearing last night from Chris Hayes and a few of the other commenters afterwards that try and, and I don't always take the commenters of the world, the editorialized people, for every word that they say as truth, but helping helping put things into context is helpful for me. And he said something last night that really, this was the plan. It was the plan to interrupt the proceeds. They wanted to delay as much as they possibly could because they felt if they could delay more, then they might pull a rabbit out of the hat. They might find a way of being able to do it. And hell, if they killed Pence while they were at it, mazel, they would be right. That would just be one more thing. And it's crazy to me to think that all of this planning, and I'm sure in the coming weeks, we will see a lot more on what was happening behind the scenes to plan for this. When you see Steve Bannon and all of those folks on video basically saying it's going to be wild, you guys got to be there, buckle up.
All hell is going to break loose.
All hell's going to, I mean, wow. Yeah.
So you mentioned the plan, and like when Trump would meet with Vladimir Putin and boot people out of the room and say, yes, there will be no readout from this meeting.
Right.
That's essentially what happened with Michael Flynn, Rudy Giuliani.
Yep.
And what's her name? Sidney Powell.
Yeah, Sidney Powell.
They released the Kraken lawyer. He had that private meeting with them for an hour before White House lawyers and White House staff realized it was happening and rushed in to make sure nothing illegal happened.
Right.
But what I assume we'll find out over the next few hearings is that their contention is that this was all planned in that initial meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know that you can prove that because no one,
but then again, you know what? Yesterday, when they would bring out the video clips of testimony, I got to tell you, I was like, wow, did not see that coming. Did not see that, we knew that there were that there were a lot of people that had worked with the committee, both under subpoena and without subpoena to go in and testify, people that were in the administration. And so hearing those people, these handpicked people by President Trump, okay, that's the thing that kills me here is that they, again, are patriots in my eyes because they're putting country before any sort of ridiculous loyalty to an individual who almost got them killed.
Right. And I want to clarify that. When I say we won't know for sure because no one of legal authority was in that meeting, I don't mean to say we can't find out that this was all part of the plan. I just mean to say we won't know if it originated in that meeting.
Exactly. Right.
But,
Yeah.
So lots more to come. And there were more bombshells last night than I anticipated.
Yep.
None of them were bombshells in the sense that they surprised me.
Right.
They just weren't items that we had evidence for.
Right. And I, like you,
right.
I, like you, because I was such a voracious reader, because I had stayed up on this, I've been reading all of the different reports. I really thought that nothing was going to be surprising to me, but I did think that they were going to start laying out their case, that these would be the opening arguments, as it were. And seeing that they really did, that I learned new things, that it was quite surprising to me. I'm very impressed with both Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney on how they're putting this together. And I'm really hopeful for what this will do for the country.
I have two more things that I want to hit. One interesting thing, some of the folks that we heard from being Ivanka and Kushner. The latter mentioned that he wasn't paying attention to some of the stuff Trump was doing because he was too busy working on pardons in the final days of the presidency, which was an interesting little snippet that they put in there that pricked my ears up like, what? So I'd like more data on that. And at the same point in time, they were talking about Republican congressmen who were asking for pardons.
Correct.
In the wake of January 6th.
Yep.
Ostensibly because they understood the things they were doing were illegal.
That's exactly right. I mean, because why would you ask for a pardon for something that's not illegal? Like, you wouldn't. Like, it wouldn't even occur to you, right?
Pardon for anything I might have done illegal somewhere in my life. I would just like a pardon. Thank you.
That's not a thing. That's not a thing. So yeah, that was shocking. Like, we had heard rumblings of that. We hadn't heard, the receipts for that. And you clearly know by the way they were talking about this, you also clearly know that they've indicated that they are going to dig in much deeper to these congressional tours that took place at the Capitol on the 5th, the day before, showing people around. I think all of that is information to come. And if they have those videos, they're going to be showing the video of those tours happening. So
I bet they do if there's cameras all over the Capitol. They showed McCarthy's staff fleeing his office.
Exactly right.
The riot started. The other thing I wanted just to mention as far as messaging, because the media is already doing this thing where the Washington Post's headline, in fact, let me just say, and this is a typical headline we're seeing today. The Washington Post headline says, "Panel blames Trump for Capitol carnage." And there are already folks out there responding going, it wasn't the panel blaming him, it's sworn testimony.
Right, eyewitnesses.
Proving that is the case. Right. Not that they just made a decision willy-nilly that we're going to blame Trump. So it's interesting to me that the media is still failing in holding this man accountable. It remains to be seen if the legal system will fail at holding this man accountable, but the media should at least have learned their lesson by now.
Wow, you would think. And to see the fourth estate really let us down to such a large degree. And then anyone that's covering it factually and just reporting out what is learned is somehow called liberal or bias. Facts are not liberal or conservative. They are what they are. And we can always argue about what those facts mean, but the facts themselves do not change. And yesterday, we heard a lot of facts. We saw video that recorded and documented facts. Those are not in question. They can't be in question. This was not, something that was done on some sort of a movie set. We saw it happening live on TV.
Firsthand video evidence, firsthand testimony is what they're providing, as well as firsthand documentation, like the judge's letter, which Liz Cheney said every American should read. I have to go look that up myself, but I'll try to link to it in the comments when I find it. And I'll say the other thing, there seems to be, and we knew they already reported that McCarthy and Stepanek and all of those folks were going to try to do a pushback. We saw last night Tucker Carlson was the only news channel that did not show the hearings, and in fact ran his whole show last night uninterrupted by advertisements, because they did not want to give viewers the opportunity to flip channels. So they were literally leaving money on the table to make sure that their viewers got his propaganda out there. But I am seeing the pushback on Twitter, on Facebook. There is a very regimented line of thinking, of pushback, that they've already been feeding their folks out there, that has gotten all the way down to the grassroots already, because I'm seeing the same responses over and over and over again. They're not necessarily sense making.
Right. They're not cogent in any remote stretch of the imagination, but they're being parroted. They're being parroted for sure. I saw some of the engagement last night on some of the socials last night with folks. Oh, it's a whole show. It was a bunch of lies. And it's like, what specifically were the lies? Because we saw the video, we heard testimony, we then saw the video of it happening, and then we heard more about it. It's like, where I don't know.
I'll be very interested for the first round of polling they do on this. To see if that swayable middle is moved by this at all.
Yeah. And I guess I want to see from that, we've seen some early polling about how serious America believes this is. And believe it or not, a majority of Americans believe this is very serious, which is a good thing. I mean, that renews a little bit of my hope in humanity. But to which they see it as a hair on fire thing, right? So that's kind of what I want to see too. I want to see not only the opinion polling, but I also want to see how many people this is moving to action. How many people say, this cannot be my country anymore. We can never let this happen again. That sort of intensity, I need to see those numbers. Like, those are the numbers that I want to see, because I believe that that is why they're laying this case out like they are, in these sort of bite-sized chunks, where they've gathered all of the information, they're packaging it so that folks can understand it and hear it. I'm hoping that that's why they're going towards this, because folks can say that they don't like it. We've seen that for a long time. You're right. Right now, we know that a majority of Americans believes Roe should be the law of the land. Okay, that's certainly not stopping the Supreme Court. That's certainly not stopping or moving any of our legislators into action to do something. We have not seen that. So that's where I want to see the intensity. We've got to see the intensity.
And I hope people are starting to make those connections. That there's this January 6th, the gun safety, the overturn of Roe.
Yep.
All of those things are interconnected.
That's right.
And people do have to mobilize and get engaged at a very high level. Yep. And I understand we keep asking people to get engaged at a very high level, but in a very precarious situation, and people just don't have an option right now. We have to get engaged at a really high level.
And the thing is, do something. That's the whole thing. We've heard from, and you've done a great job on this podcast, which has been so incredibly enlightening to me. Listening to folks who began with no political experience, who began with nothing, and they come into it, whatever spoke, they come into the wheel on, to the political wheel, and they start gaining those skills, and they take those skills and they move them into action to do really big things. And that's kind of the message that I think is so incredibly important. If you are frustrated, we are too. It's not good enough anymore, even if it was to begin with, it's not good enough anymore just to add a like or to post a comment. It has to be action. We have to do something. And it can begin small with calling your member of Congress. It can begin small with finding out who's running and offering to help. It can begin small, but do something. Your country needs you.
With that said, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate your weighing in this morning with me. And I'll try to get this up quick because this is a hot topic right now.
Yep.
But sit tight. We're going to get to our actual mini podcast. We've already done, seems like a mini podcast, but
Right.
We're going to get to a mini podcast because Lefty is on summer break for the next few weeks. So I'm excited.
I'm looking forward to seeing the pictures of Lefty out on vacation. Like, I want to see him out on vacation, enjoying maybe, a Lefty beverage.
Fair point. We'll make that happen.
Sounds good.
Thanks.